Okay, we are recording. I am Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Ellie Cohen, who is Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy and the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. Ellie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're talking about microtransactions in video games, right? Which is something you've been working on for a while. You have this really awesome post on Aesthetics for Birds about it from February 2021. And I guess we'll just start with the basic question of, for viewers or listeners who don't know, what is a microtransaction?
Yes. Okay. Good question. A microtransaction is a small scale, usually a small scale transaction that enables players to spend money on virtual goods within a game. The ones that I think are the most interesting are the ones that you see in the middle of gameplay, but we can speak about it more broadly too. So just to give like a little bit of a taste of what these look like, what kinds of virtual goods you could get. It ranges anywhere from gameplay enhancement, so like more time or more powerful weapons, to things like currency or cosmetics, like a skin for your gun or different attire for your character, to things called random items. These are like card packs or loot boxes. They're probabilistic in a way, so they give you like a chance at getting some item or some set of items that's not known to the player in advance. Yeah, so there are lots of interesting things to say about these things economically, psychologically, philosophically, legally. And the kind of thing that I like to think about is whether or not something exploitative is going on when producers present these sorts of things in the middle of gameplay.
So, is something exploitative going on, right? Because it seems like it, right? And I mean, I guess one way to argue is it's not exploitation that's happening. These players are playing the game, they know what they're into,
That's
and they
right.
can choose not to pay real world money for in-game goods, right? And so, you know, individual freedom, they can do what they want, and there's
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong that game developers and game companies are doing. And so, like, what's wrong with that way of thinking?
I'm gonna even just like expand on what you just said and give
Okay,
you like a
cool.
little bit of propaganda too. So yeah, that's exactly the question that I think is troubling and interesting from a philosophical perspective. It seems like once you set certain things aside, like transparency issues, deceiving people is wrong, let's just assume, um, then, and issues with exploiting children, then it seems like just like a normal transaction among adults, and that's just up to the person buying it to decide if this is not good for them. Um, Something else that was kind of coming up in what you were talking about is there are a lot of benefits to microtransactions, and it comes a little bit from the history of why we have them. Um, we've moved from this single purchase model where I go to the store and grab like a case off the shelf, play the game, and that's my only relationship with the developers. But now we have this ongoing relationship. People talk about services rather than these just single purchase goods. I'm getting updates all the time. The game is improving. People on the development team, there are more of them. There are like 400 people on these teams rather than 40 like it used to be. And they collected some data. People aren't going to pay past that $60 price ceiling. And so they're like, okay, how do we monetize games? Let's add these little transactions. That's actually really great because it gives the player a choice about how much they want to pay. That seems like a really positive moral feature. They allow players to pick their price point. It subsidizes the game for people who can't pay. It subsidizes, or it allows people who don't have time but money to skip to late game content in some cases. It expands what kinds of games we have. And of course, it helps monetize games. So, I mean, when you hear all of these things, you're like, wow, this is not just like a normal transaction. In fact, this is really good. It's expanding our autonomy and freedom and choice. Okay, so what's so bad about it? I think, and I personally don't think it's really all that bad. I think it is a kind of exploitation. There are two kinds in particular that maybe I'll just give you a little bit of the theory of that. Would that help? So exploitation is defined in the literature as taking advantage of something in someone else, unfair advantage. So it's good that I just corrected myself there, because I could be playing a game of chess with you and take advantage of some weakness in your setup, and that wouldn't be considered exploitative in the moral sense. When it comes to exploitation, like labor exploitation, or getting someone drunk and ushering them into a back room or something like that, we can see this kind of break up into substantive cases. So there's something disproportionate about the exchange of goods. The value of the product itself was maybe too high, or too low, like I'm paying someone too little for their labor, or I'm making them pay too much because they're in a specific circumstance, to procedural exploitation, which has to do with some sort of deviation from a fair procedure in that practice. So transparency issues would come into part of that. I think both of these things are going on in the case of microtransactions, and it was sort of surprising to find out that there was a substantive issue. So this is a bit anecdotal because we don't have access to the data from a lot of these major game companies, but I saw a GDC talk, Game Developer Conference talk, where the monetization specialist told the audience that microtransactions are inelastic. And I found that sort of surprising on the spot, because they don't look like things that are normally inelastic. So just to get us on board with what that means, an elastic good is something that a change in the supply will result in a proportional change in the demand in some relevant sense, whereas an inelastic good will deviate from that proportional change. Normally, inelastic goods are like necessities, like insulin, or things that are addictive, like cigarettes. And so it's interesting that microtransactions present this opportunity for maybe there's an addictive quality to them, although I don't know because I haven't gone out and studied that sort of thing. So I have these sort of speculative things. One is games themselves provide these pseudo-monopolistic settings. They're sort of like airplanes, where there's a lot of competition up front about which airline you're going to pick, and there's like a normal competition among the people who are selling you the ticket. And I can decide, like, I really like Delta, so maybe I'll pay a little bit more. But once I'm on the Delta flight, only they can charge me for the chips. And that means they have at least the opportunity, I'm sure there are like tons of regulations about this, to jack up that price because they expect me to get hungry on a 10-hour flight. Similarly with video games, it seems like while there's a lot of competition for what game I buy, and that acts in the normal way because none of these games seem like essential, like insulin or cigarettes essential. But once I'm in that game, the only person who can really sell me that cosmetic item is that development team. So that's substantive exploitation. Maybe there's a pseudo-monopolistic thing going on, maybe something addictive. I think maybe it's a little bit more subtle than that. And that sort of is in combination with this view that I have, that I wrote a little bit about in the Aesthetics for Birds post, which has to do with the kinds of things that games are and the kinds of experiences that they put us into might lead to certain kinds of things that we do with our rational profile that make us susceptible to being taken advantage of. And again, if that's the definition of exploitation, taking unfair advantage of someone, then we see that something like exploitation is happening.
Yeah, right. And with that sort of case, it's I get invested in the game. I get immersed in the gameplay, right? And this is what you talked about in the Aesthetics for Birds piece, right? And I care about winning, right? And I've invested tens, if not hundreds of hours in playing it. And it seems really, exploitative to be like, actually, to get to the next level, you need to spend $10, right?
That's right.
Or, in order to unlock this character that, is super powerful and awesome, you need to pay $19.99. right?
Yeah.
Plus tax and
Or
fees.
even feels like a core feature of some franchise, like Darth Vader is only acceptable or is only available for you to play if you pay this little price, because we know you're going to want that. But keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah, right. And I mean, whereas like old school video games, like the kind I grew up playing, right? On like think about like Sega games like NBA Jam, right? Like there were all sorts of characters you could unlock with just like finding out what the codes were, right? Like you type in P Funk, you get George Clinton, right? Which is the
Yeah.
guy I always wanted to play, right? And it's like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. Whereas now, they'd be like, oh, you want to play as George Clinton, right? Like $5, right? Or, whatever. And that seems, problematic to someone from my generation, right? Who didn't
I
grow up
agree with
with this
that.
sort of game. Yeah.
It's almost like paying people for like breathing air or something. It should have been free to us in the first place. I mean, that's how I sort of came into it too. But when you talk to like developers, they sort of, while they don't like the monetization stuff, they sort of roll their eyes at that response, because they're like, look, these games are so expensive to make and you're getting so much out of like so much value out of that $60 that you paid. Like, just give us a break here. We need to fund our team. And I'm sure you can get on board with that too. But yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the case of presenting you a microtransaction in the middle of like the gameplay enhancement style of microtransaction. This sort of connects to this term that I hear people in design programs talk about. It's called stickiness. There's an economics term which has to do with like how many of your monthly average users are daily average users, active users. So how many of your monthly players are playing every day? But they use the term stickiness more broadly to talk about like specific game mechanics that keep people in the game every day. And one of them they do use is they're like, okay, we can actually track what kind of player you are, put you into a little box, and then decide things like, okay, this person is going to be like stuck in this moment. So let's figure out when the best time is to like present them with this like, don't be stingy, like save your troops because they might die. And like, they use that kind of phrasing to get you pulled into it. And that's right. When you're in that sort of setting and you're given a sort of directive, like go save the princess, and you feel that desire in that moment and you feel the pressure of that goal. And then all of this sort of urgency is added to it. You can act in a sort of way where your preferences realign, where it becomes rational in the game to spend a little of money to help that princess out.
Yeah, right. And this hooks into stuff your colleague Tina Wynn has written about, right? In his
That's right.
book
Yeah.
Games, Agency is Art. And for him, games are the art of agency, which means like they're giving us in part aesthetic experiences of our own capacities and our own actions and our own, abilities to make strategies and implement them. Right. And for him, in order to play games in the mode of striving, right, which is striving play is the mode he talks about, right, is to become fully immersed in the agent that the game designers have constructed for us, right? And so games, are super immersive, and more so, I think, than novels, more so than movies, because you're an active participant in the story, right? Like as we were talking about before, right? That part of that has to do with the before as in before we recorded, right? It has to do with like the music changes.
Yeah, exactly.
We do, right? And so it's like, ooh, like I have control over this world to some extent, and I'm invested in it. And yeah, we come to care about what the game designers make us care about. And at particular moments where we need to like really work hard for something that we care about to happen, then they're like, you want to make that happen? It's $4.99, right? Or you want to make that happen?
Exactly.
It's $9.99, right? That does seem morally troubling. I don't
It
know.
does, yeah.
So yeah, talk to me more about that.
I totally agree with basically everything you've said. It's games are distinctively you know, about giving us this agency, giving us these goals. They're interactive. So I agree with you that they're more immersive in a sense than movies, because we're actually we're the ones doing the things. So we have, I would claim, more of a sense of like commitment to what's going on, because I could die in this moment or something. Maybe that's a bit like too much, but I think it's true that, like, you know, when I die in the Dark Souls, against a Dark Souls boss, like I did die in some fictional sense. And I think that like, especially in cases where we're committed to that goal and we've sort of blocked out the world around us in a sense, to a degree, something like selective attention is happening, you know, like with the gorilla experiment. You just don't notice that something's going on the outside, or you don't really think about what you want on the outside of the game, that you sort of, even if you're aware, like, you know, I have this bank account or this is my bank account, this is the amount of money that I have, the preferences that you have to sort of, in that moment with the urgency, because you're committed to this agency, it is rational for you to act in that way in that moment. Right. So it's the agency constructing thing, it's the self-involvement aspect of it, it's the interactivity, and that sort of sets video games, or maybe games in general, apart from things like movies, because they don't have that agency thing, they don't have that self-involvement thing, they don't have that interactivity. I do also think, and I get a lot of pushback from this, I still haven't been convinced on the other side, so maybe you can help, that it's also in a sense more immersive than things like D&D or tabletop role-playing games, or interactive theater like Sleep No More. So I don't play a ton of D&D, and this is why I think I get a lot of pushback from it. But I think there's a sort of like immersive sweet spot that you can hit when you've got like the controller giving you haptic feedback. You have like the audio really playing into your experience, and you know, your visual field taken up by like this real world that you're like getting a lot of give and take in the physics. Like you can actually push up against it, and there aren't any like real artificial things that go on when you're in a case that's like really immersive. So hitting up against a wall in a game, that can really take you out of that zone. But when you're not doing that sort of thing, it's not as clear as even like an immersive theater setting, that there aren't these like boundaries you can't pass. Because I know I can't just like punch one of the actors, or I can't walk up the stairs, or in D&D, like, technically speaking, while there is an extensive and amazingly like set up rule book, that we could go against that, and we could like have fun breaking the rules or doing things that are a bit like physically fantastical for that setting. So sort of that combination of you interacting, but also there's something imaginatively that you don't have to work so hard at. The game provides that visual setting or something. That I think hits that sweet spot. And of course, this is like psychologically speculative, but I think it's true.
Yeah, and as you were talking about D&D, a thought occurred to me, which is like, it sort of shows how video game companies and developers are being you know, exploiting players. It's, you know, imagine you're playing D&D and like you're 50 hours into your campaign that you've done weekend after weekend, right? Or even 100 hours, whatever. And then all of a sudden the dungeon master is like, actually, you want to get to the next town? Give me $20. Right? Like, otherwise
Yeah.
I'm not advancing you, right? Like, that's clearly being exploitative, right, of players. And it feels like it, at least in some cases of microtransactions in games, it's just like, it's very much like that. Like, you want to continue, right? Then you got to pay out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's some people like to think that like the exception is cosmetics, and I always love to hear people's opinions on this, because I used to think like those are just fine. Like if someone is just like adding to their it's almost like a collection or something like that. Like I just like to collect coins, or I just like to collect these figurines. I don't know, there's something to me that's slightly different about it though, because you're sort of in this. Okay, there are two things to say. One is like, people like us who played games where there were no microtransactions, or the microtransactions were very different. So you might think that putting a quarter in to continue your Pac-Man game is like a version of microtransactions. For the kids that are sort of growing up with this stuff, I think they're being told that these virtual goods have the value that are presented to them. And that's sort of, I don't know if it's problematic, but it's definitely interesting to me that like we kind of come to these sorts of things and think, you're making me pay for something that I should never have to pay for. It doesn't take a lot of time to make that object. So like there's something you might think substantively exploitative because virtual goods don't have any value whatsoever. But if you get past that, it's sort of interesting to think like the kids that I've talked to some kids about this, and they're like, oh yeah, no, it's like, I love paying for microtransactions because like, I want that hat. And like, why is that any different than going to the store and buying a hat? And the only thing I can say is that it's just got to be about giving you that desire in that moment in this sort of setting. So that's why it's different than walking to the store and buying chips or some collectible, is that desire is sort of like built up in an interesting and different way in that moment in a video game, which is sort of drawing on the T idea that you've been talking about. They give you goals, they give you constraints, they give you tools to carry that out. And some of those tools are microtransactions.
Yeah, right. And it sort of reminds me about debates pertaining to paternalism, right? With respect to like, should stores be allowed to put like candy bars like at eye level, right? Like at the counter where you have to check out, right? Because there it is, it's giving you, you didn't come into the store to buy, sugary snacks, but it's right there. It's $1.50, right? Like that sounds good. And so it's a way of them like giving you desires you didn't already have, and whether or not, they should be legally allowed to do so, regardless of the moral question, right? And of course, the argument there is, it's, well, people are individuals and they're responsible for their own actions. And if they are weak-willed, that's on them, right? And whereas a paternalist is going to be like, actually, we should try to help people be the best version of themselves that they want to be. And if they want to be healthy, then, we should put restrictions on corporations or stores or whatever, so that, you can sell candy bars. They just need to be off, not, there as a temptation or something.
Yeah, I like this analogy. It's sort of because again, I started this by saying like I don't think they're that bad. It's just sort of like the way that they're doing it that sort of irks me. And it's and that's a good case, because it's like, okay, maybe it's not like we should get rid of candy bars because that's patronizing or something like that. Like people should be allowed to a degree to like indulge in their their vices, and maybe that's true of cigarettes. I don't know. But there is something to giving people more control over their preferences, especially so in the case of the game, it's like maybe it's similar to being outside the store versus inside the store. In the game, it's like, okay, if you wanted to put a self-ban on spending, or if you wanted to put a spending limit on yourself, then that would help me respect whatever that out-of-game desire is. Although we were talking earlier too about how maybe the games, at least some of them, give you desires that sort of transcend the game experience, and somehow maybe like an addiction or something come outside of what this, the setting that it was originally introduced in. That they're not these like temporary things that and I don't know if that's some sort of like, if that's problematic, but it is something that you can take advantage of. It's a good question to ask, like, whose responsibility is that? And I think it's got to be both. That's why I'm not like remove the microtransactions altogether. It's just make them a little bit more difficult, and like maybe don't present them in moments where people are going to be acting impulsively on these newly created desires that you gave them, which almost feels slightly manipulative, when they're like, attention is very selective, and when they've sort of experienced a change in their, in the strongest way of wording it, in their agency. So when they sort of have this experience of transforming into someone else, at least in a minor sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you know, you brought up gambling, and I think that that's a really like important point here, right? That you know, and especially with respect to weakness of will too, like there are people that can, you know, I'm going to the casino, I've got my $20, I you know, get it for, you know, coins or tokens or whatever. I play slots until I run out of money, or you know, after 2 hours, like that's my limit, and then once I'm all out of money, I'm done, right? But there
Yeah.
are other people who go into the casino with that attitude, and then the slot machine, or you know, whatever particular, you know, game they're playing just like sucks them in, and all of a sudden they're $50 down, they're $100 down, they're out like their week's salary, right, or their
Yeah.
pension. And it's because those games are designed specifically to, you know, play on our various like, you know, pleasure systems or whatever, reward systems, and
That's
they're
right.
designed to be manipulative. And it seems like some video games, you know, and especially as you're describing, where it's like they know that they're immersing you into them, and they know they can get you to care about stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't care about.
And we
And
want that, right? We do
yeah,
want that. It's just, yeah,
yeah,
continue.
and we want it. And so they know that, oh, at this particular moment, like this is like the maximal moment to strike, right? Where it's, you know, you want to get the, you know, the more powerful weapon, you want to, you know, be able to get to the next level, like why don't you pay out now, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And they use these social things too. Like they I always feel bad picking on a game, but like Duolingo has these like daily streaks, and or this like streak mechanism. And basically like if you if you go into their app and you do certain problems daily, then you like that counts as having you know, practice the language that you're interested in. And this is like, it comes from a good place. Like, well, I don't know if the incentive for introducing it came from a good place, but it's got like a good message ultimately behind it, which is like, you know, regular practice of some skill, or especially with language, will help you learn it better. And it is incentivizing you to do that. But people get like very attached to this number. And I'm sure T has a lot to say about this kind of gamification. But yeah, I mean, I had a friend over the other day and he had lost his streak, and he's like, it's fine though, because I can pay to like redeem myself. And I was just like, wait, why would you do that? And because I'm sure in their design meetings, someone was like, why don't we just like, you know, congratulate people for doing it like a lot of the time? And some monetization person was probably like, yeah, but we know that people really want that streak, and there's the social element that can bring them into it too, so they can like share this on Facebook, and people can see the Wordle score, and doing that and creating a commitment to other people now too, not just the game, is it's I don't know if it contributes to immersiveness, but it does contribute to this like strange reward and then consolidation of certain activities that keep you in every day, to like make sure it's almost like you're like tending to something that's alive. It reminds me of those toys when I was a kid. I'm forgetting what they're called, but you had to like
The
literally feed them.
Tamagotchis, like the
Yeah.
little, yeah.
And you feed them or they die.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, right. I mean, you mentioned Wordle, and yeah, like the fact that some people still do post their like Wordle scores daily on Facebook is like odd to me, because I stopped doing that after the first like few weeks, right? Like okay, like people get it. But yeah, so I like there was something wrong with my computer, and so like I'm still trying to figure it out, but I had to like erase all cookies and stuff to like see if that would fix it. And so I lost my Wordle streak. I
yeah.
lost my Quirtle streak and my Octordle streak. Like I lost all of them. And yeah, if they were like, if it cost me $5 to somehow get those back, like, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but I could see like, cause I was just like, okay, whatever, I don't care. Like if it was, but if
Yeah.
it were something that I posted every day, and like my friend group was like super, like we all did it, I could see someone being like, oh, $5, sure, I'll get my streak
Is it
back.
just $5?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like genuinely, it's so hard for me to like think about what I would do in these settings. Like I could see myself going one of two ways, like either being like, it's just $5. And like, yeah, I would do it. Or I could see myself being extremely relieved by not having to keep up with the streak anymore. And it's, yeah, there are sort of like two kinds of people with respect to the microtransactions stuff. So we use this term from casino lingo, the whales, where something like 2% of how much money a company is making comes, sorry, about 90% or the majority of the money that you're getting from someone in a game comes from 2% of your consumers.
Whoa.
Those are the whales. So they spend a lot of money. And some people, when you talk to them about microtransactions, it's very clear that they feel like guilty for spending this sort of stuff, or will hide it from other people. Like my friend was talking about her sister who, I don't know what the game is, but she spends like a huge portion of her like bi-weekly salary on wolves, and it's sort of like this cosmetic thing, like the glowing wolves. And when her friend confronted her about it, like, you spent like $1,000 on like these wolves, like what were you thinking? Don't you realize you're irrational? She sort of was like, yeah, felt extremely guilty, regretted it, but couldn't control it. But then you have this other side of the consumers who are like, don't call me a whale. Like, this is my hobby. This is what I spend my money on. Like, I like really nice guitars, or I like really nice, cosmetic outfits in this game. And I really, yeah, that's why I think I always return back to this, like, when you're confronted with something like this phenomena, and I'm sure it's, it comes up all over different industries, you've got to manage respecting the person and the different groups of people in that role while not patronizing them, just like the candy thing we were talking about, like, or the cigarette thing. Again, I don't know to what degree this should stop, or if like casinos, but that's what they do at casinos. They're like, okay, the way that I can manage that, respecting you as an autonomous, rational individual, is by, this is hopefully what they're thinking. Maybe someone is imposing this on them, is by allowing you to put this self-ban or this spending limit, so that you can respect that that possible change in what you regret or what you feel ashamed of. And if you don't, then like, feel free and throw the money at it, because maybe it's just right. Like, for some people, their attitude toward this stuff is, this is what I like to spend my money and time on, and I'm not really sure that there's anything wrong with that. In some cases, it's just when you see people feeling that shame, that does suggest something moral or something objectionable might be going on, and it just doesn't take so much to do that. And probably this is the most true of things like loot boxes, those sort of randomy things.
Yeah, can you talk to me about loot boxes? Because that's exactly what I was going to bring up. So please, cool. Like, enlighten me about loot boxes. This is something I know very little about.
Okay, this is really fun to talk to students about, because they are just like, I think it's fun to talk to them about. So, okay, loot boxes are a kind of random item. They're, again, these features of games where the player is given this probabilistic shot at some good or some set of goods, where that thing that they're going to get is not known to them in advance. It sort of looks like slot machines or card packs. So the first charge against them that you'll see all over the place is that they're unregulated forms of gambling. And so a few legal scholars in the past few years have looked into, okay, what is the definition of gambling in various countries, and should they be regulated under these laws? And in the US, I believe gambling is defined at the state level, so it's going to be slightly different. I'm going to be working with like the California one, but it's roughly the same. Almost everywhere in the United States takes on 3 conditions for something to be considered gambling. One, it has to be something where the entrant risks something of value, where value is monetary. I'm going to speak in a vague way. That's okay. At the chance of winning something of value. So they risk something of value at the chance of winning something of value, where there's a degree of chance or randomness involved in determining the winner. So you don't want to include like absolutely everything because, you know, chanciness is involved in anything. So there's got to be some degree to which it's like a significant way in which you decide the winner of the entrance is probabilistic or randomy or chancy. There have been, I'm sure there are more, but two really interesting cases of things that were not loot boxes or related to video games that had this charge of, are you gambling? And have gone through these definitions, and they were determined in both cases not to be considered gambling. One is sweepstakes. So those like, I'm sure you see this all the time on like cereal boxes where it's like $1,000 cash prizes if you buy, you know, you will be entered into this like drawing, 5 people will win $1,000 cash prizes. So, and it seems like, okay, so you're risking something of value, you're buying the cereal box for the possibility of gaining something of value, this $1,000 cash prize, and there's some sort of degree or chanciness involved. And the way they get out of this is on the back of those cereal boxes, there are ways of entering for free. So this is no true risk of value because you could have opted to buy the stamp, get the envelope, mail it in back in the old days, go online, type in your email or something like that. And usually you have a much better chance of winning if you buy the cereal box, but just because it's possible in some relevant sense for you to win without spending any money that directly benefits the sponsor, this is not considered gambling in US law. The more interesting one is card packs. So baseball cards used to be sold to us without these chaser cards, these like kind of high value rarer cards, but they were introduced into the market after that, and there was this like uproar about this being gambling and it's affecting the children, and same sort of moral panic around it. And there was some court case where they discussed this issue, so it wasn't actually directly about this, but it seemed like the reasoning was going on in the courts was there's no possibility of losing because you always get some baseball card or other. So, and it was merely promotional in a sense because whenever you're buying baseball cards, you're buying some set of cards, and that randomness is not in any way considered like losing. So when you go to loot boxes, the way that people have gotten out of this charge is they've said one of like 3-ish, 4-ish things to get out of the last condition and like get rid of chance or randomness. Just it's a microtransaction. Not all loot boxes are things that you pay for. So that's the first way they get out of it, is they give you free options, or like, you know, on Christmas, you get like 5 free boxes. And so it's possible for you to get any one of the given items that you could win in a loot box if you like wait until that moment, or if you like have an Amazon Prime account. I think Overwatch did this, where you can get like some amount of loot boxes for just having an Amazon Prime account and linking your account with that. Sometimes they do this like at a daily level, but it's interesting in this case because it sort of acts like a little bit of a like, hey, do you want to try my gambling thing, and like hooking you into it. And I think South Park did an episode a while back about how it's sort of like giving people like the taste of a drug. Like, do you want to try this? It's free. And then you've like hooked people in. So I think that's interesting. That's basically there's no risk of anything of value because you could enter for free. You could get the thing without paying a cent. They do the same thing the baseball cards do, which is there's no chance of losing because there's no risk of losing because you always get something from the box, even if it's not great or it's not what you wanted. A third thing that I've heard them say is because you can't sell these things, there's no value at all. So there's no possibility of winning something of value because it's just a virtual good and that's valueless, which I think is interesting too, now that sometimes they have these like secret markets of people selling their accounts and stuff like that, but that doesn't count because it's not, you know, something that the sponsor or the team at EA cares about. So that's why it's not considered gambling, but that still leaves open the question about whether or not there's something nonetheless addictive about these things, or if there's something about them that leads to gambling addiction, or which actually should ring some violence bells in your ears, like this kind of consequentialist style. Does playing violent video games lead to like an uptick in violence or crime? An analogous argument is made for loot boxes, which is, does engaging with loot boxes lead to real gambling? And it seems like the literature, so for the violence literature, it's sort of like up in the air. There's no really good way to even test those sorts of things, because it's an ethical issue about, how could you present harmful things to people and then test that? What is the definition of violence? What is the definition of a violent game? What is aggressiveness? Really difficult to study. In the case of loot boxes, people are starting to come out with studies that seem to suggest yes, and children are more susceptible to developing a gambling addiction, and that they do seem to show signs of psychological addiction. So that is absolutely a moral issue. And I think once you add them into a game like Battlefront 2, and you have all of this immersive stuff going on and all of this agency constructing stuff and this self-involvement, it just sort of like doubles up on all of the issues that I see. I'll take a pause there. I've been ranting for a while.
No, that's fine. And I mean, one thing that's interesting is, the reasoning you gave, right? That like these game companies or developers give to say that loot boxes aren't gambling, right? Each of them is morally problematic in its own right.
Doesn't
right?
it seem that way?
The first one, right, that you mentioned was, precisely like, well, we'll give you some for free, right? Which is, well, if they'll give me this for free, imagine what they'll give me if I pay, right? Which is like an enticement, right? Which is very much like, the drug dealer that's like, hey, the first joint's free, or like the first bump of Coke's free, right? So there's that one. Then the last one, the third one you said was, well, actually, there's nothing of value here, right? Which means it's immoral to charge people for things that you recognize are valueless, right? Like that's really troubling, right? And so it's interesting that each of the reasons to get them off the legal hook puts them on a moral hook, right? That
I agree. Yeah. They're presented in some wildly deceptive ways. So like, this is my favorite when people talk about transparency. I think like, oh yeah, that's an issue, especially like if you're lying, then that's not good. And they do like funny things in general with microtransactions, like stealth launching is this, you don't tell anyone what your monetization scheme is, and then you include things like microtransactions on release, or even worse, you straight up tell the news, like, we will never include anything like microtransactions, and then in an update sort of go back on your promise. And this runs into issues with like ESRB ratings, which are just sort of like movie ratings, but for video games, they're content warnings almost. And they tell you like, okay, there's blood and sex and cigarettes, so it's a rated M game. But also just like random items will be included. The more interesting thing about transparency in the loot box case is sometimes people will disclose information, but it's entirely unhelpful to the user. So a lot of mobile games in the UK market, I think there was something like the average game, I'm going to get the numbers not precisely right. There's a wonderful paper about this. Something like there are 460 different kinds of loot boxes in a given game. So like with different reward, schedules or probabilities that may change depending on how much you've spent on loot boxes. So you might like, I think it's called a pity timer, where the more you buy, the more likely you'll get the good thing. And there are some wild probabilities about like what your chances are of actually winning is something like 0.0008%. Of winning like what's perceived to be a good item. And they sort of take physical heuristics and turn them on their head. So like there's a casino game that you would expect that rolling 3 6s will give you the same, like you'll have the same shot at winning sorry, you'll have the same shot at rolling 3 6s as you will rolling 3 1s, but because it's a virtual game, you can sort of like wonk with the numbers there. And it's something like 2.7% for rolling 3 6s, but like 0.2% for rolling 3 1s. So you just sort of like why would you do that other than to trick people and sort of be like, I mean, I am being transparent. You can go read my long list of 400 different kinds of loot boxes if you want to find out what you're up against. So transparency has got to be like not really the biggest issue, as it is like obscuring things to your consumer or not giving them control over their preferences on the outside of playing. I don't know, loot boxes are interesting though.
Yeah. No, awesome. I think on that we'll leave it. We've been talking a while. So
Cool.
Ellie, thank you so much for joining me. This was a really
Thank
awesome
you.
discussion.
Yeah, it was great to hear your input too, because it's still like such a new project. So I learned a lot too. Thank you.
Cool. Well, glad to be of help.
Yeah.